Welcome everyone, appreciate everyone here. So I'm going to start by, if you could show your hands if you do complete these type of inspections on well, septic, or both. Kind of, sort of, pretty much everyone in here. And anyone privately have a business that they do, no, just through the employee, the county that you work for. So anyways, this is going to entail two different hats that I wear. One's going to be through the county, and one's going to be, most of it's going to be through my private business. So as these inspections go, I pretty much do complete the same format for both, privately and through this county of St. Clair. So we're going to start out with the wells, the water supply and well inspections. I do want to add, just right at the beginning of this presentation, when I go out to a home, the first thing I do is I get inside the house, get access, start running water, load test. Hopefully you have a realtor or a homeowner there to keep an eye on the plumbing. I had a toilet overflow a couple of months ago and there was shit everywhere. It was ugly. So you want somebody to watch, because as the water's running, I usually give it about a 15-minute period to collect samples. Typically speaking, I'm going to get a partial chemistry, looking for nitrates and a bacteria, coliform and E. coli. Lately, probably the last 10 years, arsenic's been a huge topic, and a lot of people now do request the arsenic sample too, so especially in like Oakland and Lapeer counties. Water system. Try to get records. If you can get on WellLogic, you're all familiar with WellLogic, get a well log. If you have any information from the owner on the depth of the well, it's always useful. When you do the well inspection, you have to look at the pump itself. If it is not a submersible, of course you're not going to be inspecting that inside the well, and also all of the plumbing leading in and out of the system. Wellhead, make sure it's isolated properly, make sure it's constructed, and there'll be some pictures here. I'll show you some cases in which that didn't quite happen. And part of the septic system now come in a later part of this presentation. Here's a kind of in a nutshell my inspection report. I document a lot, I write a lot. The more you document, the less liable you're going to be, per se. So I definitely choose to put in a lot of information in regards on how much water I run, where I run the water. Describe the stone. Is the stone matted? Is it clean? Is it wet? Where's the saturation point? All this information, most homeowners, buyers, sellers are going to go, don't mean anything to me. But, you know, if you have more documentation than not. If anything was to come up as a problem, from that point on, you have documentations. And with that too, I have pictures to go with the reports, which we'll be seeing here shortly. On the right, you see a diagram. I always measure the lid of the tank. So that'll make it easy for the purchaser to find the tank or the hauler. Instead of having to probe, most people don't have a probe. They can find that cover from two different locations on the corner of the house, two different directions. This is kind of a brief report from myself, and this is an inspection report from a county that I've obtained through a FOIA process. The well log is super important, and the well and the septic final inspection, if they have them, are super important too. Lots of information on there. Once again, document, document, document. You want to take as many pictures as you possibly can. I don't necessarily present that to the buyers, but it's always on my computer, so I always have access to them. Water supply. There it shows the basics, your pressure tank. A lot of things you want to look for on your pressure tank. The gauge, make sure the gauge isn't all corroded, it's working. Make sure the pump's cycling. You want to usually be around 30 to 50 or 35 to 55 cycle pounds per square inch, and it don't cycle continuously. And if it does, you know there's something wrong with the bladder, tank's waterlogged. Simple 5 minute of sitting and watching the pump cycle It'll give you an idea on how well that system's working. Pressure relief valve on the older systems, you will not see them. Newer systems, you better see them. They're required. And your switch, of course, your pressure switch, you'll see that on submersible. Sample tap, make sure that's 6 inches off the floor. I don't really make a big deal if it's not, because typically you don't get that 6 inches more than probably 50% of the time, as long as you can get a bottle under it. But that's code, it's supposed to be 6 inches. Typical wellhead has to be 12 inches above the ground level. And if it's in a vulnerable place, you want to put a lighthouse over it, put rocks around it, do anything you can to protect that wellhead. There's a newer well. You can see the gray conduit, that's the electrical code. So if you don't see gray, I note it, but I don't really make it to an issue where the buyers are going to get all upset and bail on the deal. Seals, vent, make sure the vent screen is there and in place. And of course the isolation distances. You want to make sure everything's measured out properly from where the source of contamination is. Much different well constructions. This one has a white conduit, as I explained. That one has a gray. It's a different pipe for different situations. This is your electrical code conduit. Typically, you'll see them on most of the new ones now. Older well caps. This one here doesn't seal properly. It's vented, it's old style cap. It's vented around the casing and vulnerable for insect contaminants. They can get in there and do their deed, and more often than not, you're going to get a bad bacteria sample on those. A couple other things you might come across: basement offset in older homes, where you'll see the pump, pressure tank. Sometimes, most of the time, you'll even see a well casing on the bottom. They're supposed to be self-drained. If they aren't, then you're supposed to write that up too, if they're vulnerable to a high water condition. And this is a older vertical deep well pump. You don't see these hardly at all. Is anyone familiar with those? The deep centrifugal, you see those quite often? What's that? On older ones, yeah. Very rare, but they do exist. So this is kind of deceptive because this actually is at ground level. So this is in a pit, pressure tank, needs to be weather controlled so it don't freeze. There's no heater. The connections and everything that you can see are a newer system brought in, but once again, it's not drained, it's not self-drained. So if you have some high water conditions in this area, you definitely want some form of draining system, some kind of pump to get the groundwater out. And I'm moving fast through this because the septic's going to take up most of this portion. Here you go, another older system, wellhead's in the basement offset. You can see the well casing right there. Pressure line. Anyone know what type of pump that is? Thank you. Shallow jet pump. Has it off the floor so to deter water in case it does flood, but that's another condition you're looking, and I don't see it here. I don't know if they do have a sump in here to allow that water to be properly drained. Water system, anyone know what that is? Thank you. Flowing well. It's got a gooseneck, air gap supposed to be twice the diameter of the pipe. And this has to discharge to a point where it's not going to be a menace, especially not on the neighbor's property, and not going to cause flooding or any issues that you may foresee. And also at the end of this discharge, you have to have a rodent-proof screen so you don't get rats coming in and plugging her up.
I have a question.
Sure.
Is that called a flowing pitless, or is that just a normal pitless?
That's just a normal pitless. Yeah, that's an older model, but they do have the flowing pitless. But that one.
Some of the really hard wells that flow in that area, I've seen they do a setup like that.
Yeah, do you have a lot of flowing wells in your area?
Not a ton, but I have a few that flow over 30 gallons a minute.
Wow. Fortunate, but yet unfortunate too. What do you do with all of it? It is, yeah. And if you ever have a bad sample, folks, on a flowing well, they're very difficult to chlorinate. You have to run a tremie rod down, tremie pipe, and push the chlorine to the bottom in order to disinfect that properly. All right, crack wells. Thing of the past. There's one well driller, and you probably all worked with him because he covers the state, Gale Prime. Anybody know Gale Prime? Nobody? He's from Bayport, kind of like up in the thumb of Michigan, and he uses a fiberglass constructed 42-inch well casing. They typically grout from 25 foot up. Looking at it right there, see the electrical conduit. It utilizes submersible pump. The state approves the system. It's all up to code. And what the intention of this well is to collect water from 25 foot. Usually they dig down to about 60 foot. So every little fissure in the ground, any little crack that supplies water, they have a bed of pea stone around that casing that collects water. For low producing wells, very successful. Of course, you got the old crack style concrete, and they're vulnerable to contamination, but not as bad as that crack well. Has anyone seen crack wells with rats in them? I seen a dead opossum once. There's crazy stuff that goes on. Never killed me, why should I have to worry? That's the seller's mentality. Buyers, not so much. So, you go out and do an inspection, where's the well? Can't find it, you can't see it, you don't have a site plan. You'll see these all the time, them fake rocks, they'll stick them over. Lighthouse, like I say, and then you got the old style crack well cover. The water system, newer system, you can tell it's been new install, pressure tanks new, all of the fittings and copper, and you got your pressure gauge, your relief valve, and your sample tap, 2 shutoffs. Everything here, anyone see anything that they might feel wrong? Probably.
Conduit on the electric, I can't see that far. Look for putting connection to the electric conduit on the switch.
On the switch?
There's no pressure.
Yeah, it's not even connected, is it? Because there's 0 pressure. This is a new stall. It's probably not even connected to electrical yet. So this was put in for... Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Anyways, that's typically what you're going to see when you do newer wells, anything with a submersible pump. So what's wrong here? Well, let's look at this first picture here. Start out there, the well cap at grade. So typically, they're vulnerable to contaminants. Any type of flooding, you're going to get bacteria. This one here, obviously, the electrical conduit's damaged. It's not connected to the cap, vulnerable to insect contamination. No pressure relief valve here. And remember that it's required the pump's capable of creating water pressure greater than the working pressure of the pressure tank. That's for the well driller to decide, but your decision is to say, hey, or your recommendation is to get a pressure relief valve put in. When you do an inspection, old style cap. This is an old hand pump with a crock well. Of course, you all know crock wells are unapproved for water source of drinking unless it's Gale Prime, which is approved through the EGLE program, water supply program. Electrical tape around the well cap, no. Not as safe and reliable water supply. Both showing conduits. That one completely missing. That one separated. So once again, this is the old style well cap, vulnerable to insects contamination. Recommend replacing. Here was a crap show. I don't know how to even explain this. It's an electrical mayhem. It's a fire issue. It's got all sorts of stuff. So they got a heat lamp to keep the water supply warm so it don't freeze up. They have goose poop from up above, was a chicken or geese or both, I think they had. So they're actually harboring animals on top of the water supply system. And the pump here is located right behind that heat lamp, and out the wall it goes. So not a real safe source to be drinking water. Filters, chlorinators, you'll see it all. A lot of times nowadays you see reverse osmosis. They're very popular usually amongst the people that want it for drinking water only. Has anybody worked with whole household removal, ROs? They're very expensive, very large system, and typically I don't recommend them unless arsenic gets higher than 50 parts per billion. But typically, in my area that I cover, I see 25 to 30 being the most that I've seen in arsenic levels, parts per billion. So anyways, water samples, I briefly went through that. You have, the bacteria is always required. Definitely get a potability test done. Partial chemistry or nitrates. Partial chemistry does include the nitrates. You definitely want to get that for health concerns. Arsenic, if it's known in the area to contain arsenic, I'd get an arsenic sample. Lead and copper, if it's an older house, and they have galvanized piping or galvanized lead solder, and sum it up. In most cases, these three I routinely get, because we do have arsenic in all the areas that I work. So that's something that you'd have to kind of check on in your area and what's common and what's not common. All right, we're out of the water supply. Let's get to the poop. The plumbing, septic systems, ins and outs. Oh, I'm sorry.
On a waterlogged tank, is that just a pump kicking on and off?
Yes.
All the time?
Yes, it is.
And then,
They can recharge that, but it don't necessarily mean that's going to hold.
a few other quick questions.
Sure.
If the well, to the best of your ability, if you can't guarantee that it's on the property,
Oh.
what do you put on your report?
Usually if they don't have an easement, you have to document
No, I
that.
mean, if you don't know exactly where the property line is, but
Oh,
you have
okay.
a feeling that it's close to that property line, do you put anything, or?
I would definitely mention that on there, because you do have to be 3 foot in distance away from that property line. If it's close, I'm going to write it up
'Cause I've had a few
with real close.
nobody knows exactly where the property line is, and by looking at everything around, that well has to be really close there.
Yeah. And usually in our GIS system for our county, we can see the property lines in every piece of parcel that we have in our county. Not saying it's completely accurate, but it gives you a pretty close proximity, then probably 5 feet.
And one last thing for the 201 sites or for groundwater contamination. So when you're doing an evaluation, do you look into that too?
I do. Through our county, we have a mapping system for it, so we have it right stuck on the wall in any lust sites or any 201 sites. We can look up the address. In other counties, you hope the FOIA will extend out and give you that information, but otherwise you're at your own research. You have to look and say, there's a landfill.
Yeah, I know.
You know, it's pretty hard.
Private stuff coming off and, like, oh, we sink for chromium in that area.
Ooh, that's not good. I'm here to tell you. Chromium. Ugh. Yeah, so that pretty much is really up to the inspector himself to determine in most cases, unless you have an ins with the county to be able to get them to look at their maps. All right, the plumbing, as I was saying before, when I'm running water in the house, the first thing I do is go in the basement or crawl or whatever I need to do to see where the plumbing is. And when I'm looking at the plumbing, I'm not looking at the construction of the plumbing. I'm looking at the direction it's going. Sump pumps into the septic. No. Laundry into the sump onto the ground surface. No. Here I got in trouble. Softener to the septic system. No, no, no. Oakland County, I got in trouble because I had them change. In certain areas, they do not want that discharge going out to a lake. So if it's a lake community in parts of Oakland, they want the softener to discharge into the septic. I say no, but the county actually had that written on the permit. Tank, everyone knows about the septic tank. You got single, you got dual compartments. Find them by probing. I got a 36-inch probe, usually find the corners. There's always an outlet lid in our area for our tanks. And the newer ones, there's two that you have to dig up to on the newer ones. The first compartment, second compartment, check out the baffle. The levels you're monitoring as you're running water, so that is very important on every job to expose that tank for the load test, the construction of the tank, whether or not it needs pumped. And I briefly explained extracting stone from the tile field, evaluating the biomat, the water table, what's over top of it, clay. Has anyone had issues with clay over top of a drain field? The worst thing you can do to a drain field is encap that with clay. Don't breathe, don't evaporate. So here we go, talk about laundry. Laundry going to the sump going onto the ground surface, and there might be another line from a wash sink or sometimes a kitchen sink. So that all has to be diverted to the septic system when you're inspecting. That has to be noted. Here, inlet side, scum level at the top of the tank. High water table, plug between the tank and the field, or the drain field shot. That's the only three scenarios when it's full. Dye test, here was one where we couldn't figure out where the drain field was, so we run a dye test. There was a neighboring ditch, watching the ditch, looking for dye. Never left the tank, it just filled up. Field shot, didn't know where it was, failure. Here's one where the outlet side is over the invert of the pipe. So your outlet side should be at the bottom of your elbow, your sanitary tee, right at the bottom of that pipe as it exits the tank. If it's above that, you have to make a choice. What I do is I bore a separate hole outside of the drain field, and in the drain field, record the water table as it relates to the tile field and the water outside of the tile field. Now, if it's similar, you know that that issue is being caused, the high water table, from the saturated ground conditions in the high water table. Pumped out before arrival. We'll get this. You'll get people that have problems, so what they'll do is they'll pump it thinking, all right, I got this guy. He can run all the water he wants. That's automatic. I'll come back and do it another day. Thank you for your time. Give me $500. You wasted my time, and I'm out of there. Just kidding. I don't charge that much. So as you see, most of the time when you go to inspect them, if they had it recently pumped, there's remnants. The dirt, the sod, everything's removed. You can clearly see. Another thing I always do is ask when they pump the tank, and the worst answer you can get on a septic tank is, we pump it out every 4 months. We're very diligent about it. Why? Because no one's paying $300 every 4 months. They have issues, so that's a huge red flag when they mention routine pumpings. Field, tile field, in-grade system. All familiar with septic systems, tank, drain field. We have very few of these. There's a sandy part of our county, Long Lake, Huron we do, but the rest of them are mound systems, engineered systems, some people call them. We got a high water table, so we don't see this very often. There's the mound system. We try to gravity feed in new construction. Existings, we do a lot of pump systems. Try to get the grade away from the house so it doesn't flood the house. Typical pump system, and everyone pretty much now uses the baskets, correct? You see, everyone sees those where they actually have the pump inside, drop it in the second compartment, and the easy installation. Here we're getting into some other options for drain fields. We got sand filter, which we don't see very much of anybody else use sand filter technology. Very nice. And that's to polish it up before disposing to a drain field. Drip irrigation, I've never seen one of them. We had about a couple of years with our constructed wetlands. We had a few of those experiments go bad. Michigan is not good for wetland systems. Aerobic treatment, we had talked about that with Dave, and leach field, pressure dosing, all this stuff you're familiar with. Just examples of what kind of drain fields are out there and alternatives. aerobic treatment unit, sand filter, drip irrigation, there's a wetland. So just kind of a model of each one if you're not familiar with them to look at. All right, 215. Field biomap. This, when I mention extracting stone, is what I'm looking for when I do a drain field inspection. Typically, this is the best ideal conditions you want to see. Dry, clean stone. And our systems are 95% stone systems. Aggregate trench and bed systems is what we have in southeastern Michigan, in Oakland and Macomb. Washtenaw, I'm not too familiar with. Livingston's a lot of trenches and bed systems. And Elgins are becoming a little bit more popular, so we're starting to see those in the modern day era. But typically we're looking at stone. So you get out here, you see the matting starts to increase as we get down on the screen. Here's complete failure. When you have 100% clogging, that's considered a failure. Typically comes up through the ground or out back through the plumbing in the house. That's, in most counties, once it hits the surface or backs up, it's considered a failure and you're required to replace it. Good inspection. Take a look at the tank, the outlet, the baffle looks good, tight. Tank's in good shape. Beforehand, during the load test, the water stayed the same after 40 minutes of running water. So all is good on this one. Drain field. Whoops.
I have another question.
Sure.
A lot of installers that do precast baffles with the cement.
We had one company that for 20 years had precast, and after 10 years of them being installed, they're laying at the bottom of the tank. I replaced a ton of them.
Yeah, but I was gonna ask, what is
Yeah,
the
they're-
life of precast? 15 years?
Yeah, I would say 15, 20, and you're lucky.
Just because of the gas?
Mm-hmm.
Just the road to it.
And I don't know of any of our manufacturers down there that have precast. They've all switched back over to the plastic. All right. Now we're on to the drain field. I have an auger that I use to extract the stone. Yes.
How do you evaluate Elgin systems?
That's a good question.
Say, like, if there's not really any stone that you want to auger into.
Right, exactly. And to be honest with you, the Elgins are so new with us right now that I haven't come across one other than new installs through the county and inspecting them. But that's going to come up. Or in other ones, the dome systems, the infiltrator systems, how do you inspect them? You can't really get up underneath to check it. I get as close as I can, and I have inspected infiltrators. Same thing, just get as close as you can to the side of the chamber and see what soil looks like. So pulling the stone out, as we were explaining, I show pictures where the bore holes are, so there's no doubts, if anyone does doubt that I did them, where they were located, and the pictures of the stone as I lay them out as they come out of the hole. Try to get through the stone. If you are doing these inspections, sometimes I've had 3 or 4 foot of stone cut. You know, they cut trenches down to the sand, build up. You can't. It's impossible. It just keeps caving in. But if you have a foot of stone in a trench, you're going to be able to get through the stone, see the subsoil, and that's where it's going to clog first. That's where you want to get to. Good inspection. All looks clean, dry, nice sandy topsoil above it. Beautiful. Here's another one. I probably just did a couple of weeks ago when we had snow. You can see the tank levels are good. Sanitary tea's in good shape. House existing. You can see the 4 remnants of the holes that I bored in relation to the house. All 4 borings are shown there. In each pictures 1 through 4. Same thing, nice and clean, dry. What you wish everyone looked like when you were out there. Another one, good inspect the tank. Take a picture. Try to get it from inside if you can. The outlet side, the baffle, you need a picture of that. And then usually I'll take a picture of where the covers were, so if they do have any problems locating the lids, it gives them kind of a picture to go off it too, if the measurements don't add up. All right, another one. good inspection. This is getting redundant. There, let's go here. Good inspection, number 4 here. Not perfect, but acceptable. This is where you're normally gonna find the conditions at the beginning of a drain field. On a gravity flow system, you're gonna see the clogging start towards the header more often than not. It's just the way the design is. The water dissipates through the perforations in the pipe towards the beginning. Then you get to the next one. I always cut a, by the way, if you look at my photos, I try to cut a diagonal. So start at the header, move 10 foot to the second run. It gives it more perspective on how that drain field's working. If you're running 5 foot from the header on all 4 of your borings, you might come up with this and fail it. Truth be known, when you have a sludge in the first hole and the other 3 are clean and dry, unless there's tree roots impeding that flow, you got a good system yet. You still got at least 75% of that drain field still viable. But then you get to the bad parts of the inspection. That's the cover on the outlet side. So you can see the seam at the top of the tank. That's when you're going to recommend a new tank. It's just a matter of time before the roots are going to allow dirt and allow the water to seep out or allow the water to seep in. Roots are horrible for any type of that septic system, and unfortunately everyone's got to have trees, so they got to plant the trees where the septic is. Fun. Bad inspection. Here's the boring locations of 1 and 2. You can see the biomat is extensive all the way from the start to the end of the trench. The cellar, not liking the news because this one needs replaced. When you see clogging and water coming up to the top of the hole, that's when its life expectancy has seen its end. It's done. Tanks, we had talked about precast. Right there's a perfect example. It's rotted off. That scum layer goes right out that pipe. There's no protection to that drain field. So you knock the wall out. I have like an ice spud that I use for ice fishing. So I will knock that wall out, stick a T on, as I did here, and as I've shown you here in the pictures, glue it, and you're good. Sometimes if it's vulnerable, I'll put a screw through it.
I have a question too. We, in this area, we have a problem with the concrete baffles. I
Yep.
don't like them as well because when you want a filter, you either have to do the brush filter for the concrete baffle,
get it
which,
in.
as you know, doesn't work as well.
Right.
as the PVC one. So, I don't know, do you think the brush filter works as well, or is it just you rather, if it's, you have to have one, do you even want to use it for a concrete baffle, or you just say, forget about it?
Yeah, and how well are the concrete baffles holding up? Are you talking a new manufacturer tank or?
To tell you the truth, I think we made the switch to two like 1250 tanks within the last 20 years. They all used to be like single comp with no concrete baffle, so it's hard to say.
Okay.
If anything, we'll probably start, like you said, 15 to 20 years. We'll probably start, falling apart now.
Yeah,
It's hard to say.
and we had a manufacturer that just up to like 5 years ago had the precast still, and we were requiring in our county that they put a plastic T on
So
it.
they knock it, yeah, because I've heard of that too, where they knock off the baffle.
Well, we kept the baffle in. You could still get it through the baffle, had plenty enough room to get your T on there. Yeah. And there's a polylock fitting. Everyone familiar with what I'm talking about with the polylock? It actually is a spiral fitting that goes in the sewer lead out, the effluent line, and it gives you an attachment to put your T on. They're not cheap. They're $50 for a piece of plastic. I wish I invented it. Anyways, high water table. You notice when you get out there, it's mushy, green, stinks. Water's starting to pond as you're running water. It seems to get deeper and deeper. That's failure. You have to replace it. And you write it up in a report as it has to be replaced. Talk to the local health department and they'll issue a permit. Nasty, nasty, nasty. typically when you have a high water table issue, a seasonal high water table, the effluent in the trenches it'll be colorless, odorless. You'd think of it as groundwater. When you have ponding on the water like this, and it's black, or you see smell, and it looks like sewage, it had nothing to do with the water table. That's clogging of the system, and that's why you require a new one. No water table involved in that. Here you can see water all the way to the top of the pipe. It's kind of a fuzzy picture, but believe me, it is. It's right up to the top of the outlet pipe, so it's 4 inches high, and then it's boiling out here. So not good for the homeowner. A lot of times you'll have a tank pumped, and you'll see this. If they're negligent on their pumping, solids are going to come up, you're going to see this. But if you have this after it's pumped, and you go out there, for example, on an inspection, if it's been pumped and you see this, you have to say there's no sludge on the bottom and there's scum on top. It probably means, especially with, got a clay outlet, clay pipe, probably means that the levels were high. You can kind of assume that. Here's a corroded inlet pipe. Plumbing issue, you can recommend that to be replaced. All right, here's one. I was out there this fall, found a nice, beautiful green line going out, probed it, and it come out to a marsh that had stone the whole way, and the stone in that trench was as black as it was at the end of the trench. 2 whammies there. It's not up to code, and it has a discharge. Phragmites were 20 foot high. It was crazy. They really enjoyed it. This is a county inspection. I had a young man and his father trying to put together their own septic tanks. They're from Europe. Apparently they can do that over there. But they blocked it, and then they sealed the inside. They had a capacity of, the first time, of about 400 gallons, and it was required for 1,250. So by the time they've got up to code with the septic tank at ground level, you're looking maybe 2 blocks into the ground, and with the elevation required on the permit, their septic tank was that high. And they haven't started building their house yet. I said, you're trying to save a few dollars. It's $900 for a septic tank, and now your house is going to be like on the top of a mountain in the neighborhood. No one's going to like you. It wasn't worth it. But that's just something that you come across. Screen pump basket, that was what I was mentioning before. We're seeing more often than not these types of systems. Access lids means that's where your tanks are. With pump systems, we require them in St. Clair County to be at least on the pump side of the pump station. And if it's deeper than a foot, we strongly recommend them on the inlet side too, just to make for more readily pumping. All right, D-box. Everyone knows D-box and pump system. That was actually taken from a Dollar General. And anyone ever heard of Dollar General? We have more Dollar Generals now than we have stop signs in our county. It's crazy. So they are based on wastewater, and Dave, you help me on this, of 300 gallons a day. And the ones I've had a hand sink and an employee's bathroom. So they have quite an extensive system and expensive system for what their wastewater load is, but they got the money to do it, so that's an example of a system with pumps, risers. You can see how deep their septic tanks are to get their plumbing down through the floor of their building. Risers to the top, pump station to a D-box out to their drain field. Of course, there's your control box, all of your alarm systems, IFS, very renowned company for pumps. Oh, I might want to add, when you're doing inspections on pumps, always make sure to lift that alarm float, if there is one. Make sure that it's visible and audible, if at all, or one or the other, so when that pump clicks, somebody knows it needs replaced. Collaboration of, I have no idea. So you have different wastewater lines coming in, the pump going out. This is tied together. We had all sorts of issues here. High water switch was draped over the electrical conduit above the tank. So that's going to be real high levels before that ever kicks on. Fernco should be glued. Riser made of pea stone. This is an old system you're going to come across. To make them correct it, you write it down the best you can do. Try to get somebody in there that's knowledgeable and get the right system in there. Hard to get a picture with that type of access to the pump. Okay, you're probing. Everyone has a probe when you're locating fields. That's what you're going to do. It's just a matter of time. You're going to put a hole through an irrigation line. So I have some couplings ready, some hose clamps, and repair them. Saves you from digging it up and having to come back. Always carry them items with you on these inspections, especially in subdivisions or small lots, because it seems like they tend to have more irrigation systems. Well, what time do I have?
Seen irrigation lines go, have you
I'm
seen
sorry.
where they've dug like right through the drain bed stone and put the irrigation lines?
Oh yeah, you have too.
Like,
And it's
so-
funny why they would even install, I've had gas lines go over drain fields, I've hit one of those once, and why they do that, I don't know. Of course, Miss Dig's not gonna get that when you're supposed to technically call Miss Dig before you do these inspections, but it's impossible to. You just say a prayer.
I had one where they rented like the slicer to slice the lines in, and they went across the laterals. The laterals were pulled off. They had to replace the whole septic.
Oh my gosh, I would have been a little teed.
Yeah.
Here is Birchville Township's in St. Clair County. It's an area, if you're not familiar, south of Lexington. First town that you come to south of Lexington, north part of our county. And we had an illicit discharge program set up, as probably some of you have too, in the county about 15 years ago, was it? Where the Drain Commission hired some individuals, some employees, to go out and check for illicit discharge septic systems. So this storm sewer, as I'm going to play right now, was discovered that discharged to a lake property where there was a nearby beach, public beach, and we were getting continuously high levels of E. coli, large amounts of E. coli. And as we finish up, if you have any questions, please throw them at me, and we'll be watching this meanwhile, if I can get this thing to run.
So the best way to find greenfields, you say like dye tests and like camera inspections, like if the owner doesn't know where it's at, because I had one lady, and she says, oh, my husband used to do it all, but he's dead, and he took the information with him to the grave. So, we had no records or anything, because the house was built in the 40s. But I had a septic tank, I just don't know where it discharges, it's on a lake, and I'm pretty darn sure it probably goes to the lake. How do you, like, what do you tell a homeowner to find out, like, how do you, because I told her, I said, hey, go get it, talk with the septic hauler and have them do a camera inspection or an eye test and give the other.
Hey, Brian, do you know how to start this? I'm sorry, I'm still listening. I can't get this thing to go. Usually I have another button on my computer. I just need that to play right there. If you hit on, I did that.
Okay.
Huh.
This side?
Oh, there you go. Maybe, there you go. All right, everyone, I'm sorry about that. So you're looking,
Like, what do you tell people when they don't know where their drain field is? Like, and you can't like, it's a small lot, I probe, not, couldn't find anything, and I think it might be under the deck. So like, what do you do, like, do you have do you tell them to get a camera?
the camera would be the first option for a septic tank.
That's what I was telling them. 'Cause you go to
Yep.
the outlet of the septic tank and put it in there and see where it goes, or there's something like the GPS thing where they can do the radar.
Yep, and they can also flush this little locator down the toilet, and they can pick it up with a sensor too. There's some options. Or you can hire a private company to come out and locate it.
That's what I told her.
If you need-
I'm not getting, she needs a well, and I don't know where the drain, it's literally a
Oh.
2-acre lot, and I'm like, I don't wanna put this well, and then 2 years later find out the drain field's right next to it, so that's what I'm holding off on the permit until you get me where the drain field is, so
Sure.
I was just wondering what you.
Yeah, sometimes it's difficult being in our business. So you'll see the remnants of what 6 homes have coming into one storm sewer. Here you go. Dun, 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 dun. This is some really exciting stuff. Oh, camera went too deep. Get back up there. Okay.
What's propelling that thing close?
I wasn't there. I'm not sure, honestly, if they have.
Wheels, like,
They, look at the steam. That was a fresh one. They just got off the toilet on that one. So 6 homes they found out were discharged into the storm sewer, and the bacteria counts afterwards, after they were corrected, went way down. The beach stayed open. We were heroes for once, instead of zeros like usual. This is a good video before lunch we should have played. Yummy.